Hello and welcome back to the Gemhawks YouTube channel. I hope you're having a beautiful day today. As promised in a recent video tutorial, I am going to share with you today how to use half round wire to assist in setting cabochons. I've got a beautiful handmade resin cab by my lovely late friend Mark Hargreaves, and I'm going to show you how to use half round wire to set a cabochon into a pendant design. Now these are transferable skills. You obviously can take that and make it into a bracelet centre or size it down, make it into a ring. You know, there's lots of different ways that you can use it. So let's start by taking a closer look at the piece we're going to work on today, and then we'll go through the materials. So it's a simplistic setting designed to show off the cabochon. Now I am well known for working with gemstone beads and cabs, but I do love people's artisanal nature, and this is a gorgeous creation from the lovely Mark. So let's just show you the back. And I'm not going to concentrate on the bail overly much today. I've kept this one very, very simple. I think the one we're going to work on today is going to be even more simplistic than this. I just want to show you that half round wire isn't to be afraid of, and it's also really, really a beautiful way to show off your cabochons. And it's quite a secure setting as well, because the flat half of the wire sits so smoothly against your gemstone or your chosen cabochon. So we're going to create a frame to begin with, and it's very similar to many of the videos that I have made for you. So I'm going to show you very quickly what we're working towards, which is an oval frame, which is slightly larger than the cabochon in question. And I've just done a little bit of 3 and 3 or figure of 8 weaving here. There's around about 2 inches just woven up there for an ultra simplistic bail. I will show you how to achieve that just now. But let's have a look at the cab as well that we're going to use. This is a gorgeous handcrafted resin cab with swirling, beautiful summery colours, thinking of the sunshine ahead, and that little signature butterfly on the back there. So what we would need to do is work with our main heavy gauge wire to begin with. Now I've chosen to work with a slightly heavier wire than normal, so we're going to use 1.25mm, which is approximately a 16 gauge wire. And I'm going to use around about 10 to 12 inches, dependent on A, how large the cab is that you're working with, and B, how fancy a bail you want. I'm going for an ultra simplistic bail today. If you want something with a lot of flourishes and bits of wire coming away, then you will want a little bit more wire than I am using. So the first thing I'm going to do is give that a bit of a warm through, just to get that ready and flexible to work with. A little bit more tense than the usual 1mm or 18 gauge that I work with. Now, because this is a manufactured cabochon, it's perfectly oval. It's got the most beautiful shape to it, and I am going to assist the making of the frame with my ancient wooden ring mandrel. So I'm going to start just over to one side of the centre and just rotate the wire around, and this is really just a place to start. So exactly the same on the other side, trying to get that approximately in the middle, but if you don't, you can always just roll that wire along slightly. So this is really just a jumping in point, and it helps to get some lovely smooth lines. Now you'll see that it's slightly different shape to the cab, and it's slightly too long. So at this point you can take your time to just manually adjust, or you can super warm that wire with your hands and wrap it around the base of your cab. Now what we're endeavouring to do here is to have a frame that is larger than the cabochon in question, not dissimilar to the globe pendant that I showed you a few weeks ago. You do need a little bit of airspace all the way around, so you can take your time to just get that sitting exactly how you want it to. And then just bring those wires over the top so that they do sit one on top of the other. We're looking for quite a nice, neat little design here. And once you're happy with that, you could take a little bit longer getting an exact replica of the cab shape. So what I would say is this is a lovely oval. You don't want that flat bit down at the bottom. You'll just need to tease that out ever so slightly to get that perfect shape. But you take your time. The next thing we're going to do is to put some uprights there at the 12 o'clock position. And the easiest way I find to do this is to come a little bit to one side, So I'm grabbing the wire that's on top at the moment, which is the one coming from the right over the top to the left, and I need to stay well to one side of that central point because we're working with a heavier wire. As you push that up, it tends to get into the middle already. Now if this happens and your wire bends are a little bit too close to the centre, I'll show you how to fix that in just a moment, but I'm going to do the other side now. So in exactly the same way, just gripping from underneath and then pushing that wire up. It's quite strong wire, even though when it's lovely and warm and flexible it's quite tough to push. So you could practice with your 1mm gauge, but part of this technique relies on using a little bit of extra oomph to ensure that you're getting some good tension. So using that stronger frame wire is a good idea, or you can always hammer a slightly lighter wire if you prefer. So we're just going to try that cabochon back in position and see how that looks. It's not too bad, I'm not overly worried about it, and all I will do next is ensure that these two uprights sit in a straight line, coming away at that 12 o'clock position, and then I will go for a little bit of figure of 8 weaving. So I'm going to use round wire to do my figure of 8 weaving, and that round wire will be 0.4mm or 26 gauge, and I'll probably use about 15 or so inches to create a length of weaving like this. So I've taken a few moments just to ensure that I'm happy with the overall shape of that frame, and I've popped around about 1.5 inches to 1.75 inches of weaving, which used between 15 and 18 inches of that 0.4mm gauge wire. If you need a refresher on that figure of 8 or 3 and 3 basket weave, there's a video just very recently in my video arsenal which gives you the absolute lowdown. Let's head back to the board and I'll show you just how to refine that frame if it's a little bit on the wonk, and then we'll move on to using that half round wire to set our beautiful cabochon in position. So before we begin to set our cabochon, let's have a look at some troubleshooting. Let's say that a little bit too much wire is on one side and not quite enough on the other side. You can very, very gently just tease the shape until it sits exactly where you want it to. And I would say with this, the more time you spend getting that circuit around your cab to be a perfect replica or facsimile, the better and the more pleased you will be with your result. So it's a little bit tight just down on this edge here, so very, very gently again. I'm just going to open that out slightly, probably a little bit more in the centre as well, and just keep trying that cab until it sits exactly how you want it to. Now because we are working with that slightly stronger wire, don't worry too much about it being pulled and pushed around. You've got an opportunity to make something that's really, really lovely. And another thing that you will note is that because my cab has got that lovely fluid around the outside edge, just like so, you will probably want to put a little bit of an extra shape just up at the top and directly opposite that at the 6 o'clock, just to accommodate the shape. So just be aware of the shape that you're working with and give yourself some time to get that to sit exactly how you want to. So overall I'm quite pleased with that. It's a little bit on the snug side, but there's one that I did work on a little bit earlier on today, and I'm overall quite happy with that. As you can see, there's a little bit more of a gap of space around the outside, and that is going to be really helpful for us. Although looking at it now, slightly too much on the one side there. So we can give this just a little bit of a squish and a squeeze until it sits in a more pleasing aspect. So overall I'm really happy with that. So let's add in that half round wire. Now I've chosen to work today with some 0.6mm or 22 gauge half round. Once you get a feel for this wire, you can gauge that up a little bit to the 0.8 or 20 gauge half round. What we're going to do, my length is around about 15 to 18 inches here, and we're going to take a look at which is the flat side and which is the half round side. So when you take a look at the wire, you should be able to tell. You get on the flat side this almost laser-like play of light, just down where my fingertips are, just here. It's a great big streak of bright white light, despite the fact I'm working with a lovely brass colour rather. And on the half-rounded side, the light just interacts a little bit more softly. So we're looking to take the flat side of the wire to the rear of our frame. And we're just going to allow that to sit from the 3 o'clock position on the clock face to the 9 o'clock position on the clock face. And we don't want that to twist at all. And we do want to make sure that we are indeed working with the flat side of that wire. So it looks ginormous up here on the right at the moment. That's just false perspective. So we want the flat side facing us underneath our cab frame. And I'm going to pinch that at the 3 o'clock position and rotate all the way around, keeping the flat side to my frame at all times. So I'm just going to pull that all the way through and very, very gently take that for another rotation around the frame. Now at the moment we can't really put a lot of tension into it because we're only wrapping on one end. So I'm just going to bring that wire up and around and make sure that I'm happy with the tautness of the coil I've just created. I'm going to flip the design over. As ever, I'm right dominant, so I need to work to my strengths, and my right hand is better at doing the more intricate things, whereas my left hand is better at just kind of holding stuff still. So what I'm looking to do now, we're keeping the flat side of that half round wire always to the frame, and I'm going to pull that firmly across the back of the design. Now obviously I don't want to deform the frame that we've spent all of our time making a perfect facsimile of the cab, but I do want it to be nice and flat and strong. So I'm just going to push that wire around at the 9 o'clock position on my clock face, making sure as we do that we're not twisting the remainder of that half round length of wire. So I'm going to push that around for a second time. Obviously it's going to send things flying, because why wouldn't it? So I have 2 full wraps on either side at the 3 o'clock and the 9 o'clock position, and I'm just going to pull those and make sure that I'm happy that there's a lot of tension across the back, but not so much that I'm deforming the shape of my frame. So if I bring this back into its final orientation, you can see how things are going to look. Let's get that nice and straight. Another thing you may notice is I've coiled in opposite directions. So on the right hand side I've wrapped around underneath the point where it first contacts with the frame, and on the left hand side I've wrapped going upwards, so sort of northwards as it were. The wrap goes upwards there, so that's not something that I've done on purpose. I would normally try to keep those going in the same direction, but at the end of the day, if I just oink that down ever so slightly, the finished design will not show that at all, really. It doesn't terribly matter, but if you are looking to get that perfection of symmetry, then try to coil both downwards towards that 6 o'clock position. So the next thing we're going to do is one of our first tricky bits, and it's not tricky difficult, it's tricky fiddly. At this point, if you have a cab that has a shiny surface, it might be worth giving it a quick polish to try and get your thumbprints off. I tend to leave thumbprints on most things. So once I've got my cab seated with the flat back of my cab on the flat surface of that half round wire, I'm going to push that into the frame, and then I'm going to draw the flat side of the wire just over here on my right hand, and I'm going to pull that over the surface of my cab. Now it will want to tip. At the moment there's just a straight line on the rear of the cab, so it has the opportunity to tip like so. We're going to try and hold it underneath with our non-dominant hand, keeping that wrap point at the 3 o'clock position, and I'm looking now to just put the tiniest bit of warmth in that first couple of inches of wire. Pull the wire over the surface of the cabochon, and I'm going to support that on the cab very, very gently, asking the wire to curve around with the flat side staying on the surface of the cab. So the flat side of the half round wire is contacting the frame and the cabochon. The half rounded side is always away. That's what we're looking at, so it looks machined, it looks almost bezel sunk in places. And what we want to do now is to take the tail of that half round wire and tuck it around the frame. Now we do need to be slow and deliberate at this point, so the tail of the wire is coming up between the cab frame and the cab itself, and it springs out because obviously why wouldn't it? And then we're just going to push that very, very gently through, ensuring that we are keeping the flat side of the wire on that frame. At a point in time it will suddenly become just a little bit easier. When you're happy that you've got the curvature set in this section of the wire, I'm going to just very, very gently pull the tail through, ensuring again that I'm keeping only ever the flat side of my wire to that cabochon, and the flat side is wrapping around the frame. Now at this point I can still remove the cab, and what I'm going to do is take that wire through for a second wrap around the frame. I'm just going to push that leading edge through and draw it gently around, and then take that wire across the back of the design. And I'm just going to pinch that up neatly with my nails and draw that wire flat side across the back of the design. You can use your nails to get a slightly flatter surface if you need to. Sometimes it gets a tiny bit of a kink in it. And what I'm going to do, if I just turn this around gently, I might just pop that one out of the way for a hot second. I'm looking at working now with the wire that's on the rear of the design. That's coming up across the back to around about the 1 o'clock position. And what I want to do here is pinch from underneath with my non-dominant hand again. Flat side is towards where the rear of the cabochon will be. Flat side of that half round wire again is on the frame. Now if you want to go the whole hog, you can make your frame with lovely square wire. I would go for quite a heavy square wire and it would look absolutely gorgeous. Tiny amount of warmth in that half round because it's quite springy, as you can see. The other side is trying to get in on the act, and what I'm going to do now is wrap 2.5 times around that frame, supporting again with that non-dominant hand, making sure that I'm getting some good tension on the back of the design, scooching that coil up and ensuring it's only ever the flat side of that half round wire is touching the frame. So it's gone slightly coiled there, so I just want to control that, because once that starts to spin around, it will make it much easier for the wire to twist on the frame. And what we're looking for is to keep the half round side of the wire visible and the flat side of that wire on the frame and on the cab. It will move just up and down ever so slightly, but I'm not worried about that. So that's where I'm going to leave this side of the design for now. You can just pinch that up. If it moves around, it will eventually settle, but for now it doesn't matter if it's still a tiny bit mobile. We've done the lower section to wrap the front of the cab on the right hand side. We now need to do the exact same thing for the lower section of the cab, as it will sit on the left hand side in its final position. So to make things even more confusing, I'm going to put the cab back into position and then I'm going to turn it around. What I'm looking to do here is to recreate that lovely swooshing shape we created with that first sweep of half round wire. So again, I'm going to make sure that I'm pulling the wire across with the flat side down onto that cabochon, and I'm going to try and replicate the point at which it touches the frame so it's equal and opposite the first wrap we did. So let's just look at that in the light. It's a little bit high, so I'm going to draw that side down. When you start tying off at more points, it will become more permanent. So again, the key here is we're keeping the half round side visible. The flat side is always against the cab and against the wire. So we're going to sit that in the position. And what I like to do to make life easier at this point is make sure that I'm happy with those two swooshes, that they match each other. Looks a bit like a fox face at the moment. And I'm going to make the first wrap around that frame, again by poking the end of the wire up between the frame and the cab, ensuring that the flat side is against the frame and the rounded side is the visible side. Now, have I done that in the right place? Yes. Is my coiling going to be in the same direction? No. So what I need to do is get that up on the other side so that it's going towards the 6 o'clock position on my wrap. So let's draw that into position, pinching quite firmly now to get the tension to hold that wire swoosh. So you can see it's a little bit like a fox face if you squint maybe. And then we're going to go for a second wrap. So again, poking up in between the cab and that frame, drawing all the way around, making sure there's no twisting taking place and that the wires don't cross over one another. And then you can see that we've got those two coils coming towards the centre of the design. So that's where I made my rookie mistake up here when we first started wrapping. So I'm telling you that so that you don't make the same mistake. And then I'm going to pull that wire up across the back of the cab And we're looking to replicate the same design on both sides. Now, whilst you don't look at the back of these, it's not a dual aspect pendant. I do like them to be beautiful where possible. So I'm going to replicate the angles, the shape and the contact points as much as I can. Again, making sure that the half rounded, the lovely rounded side is visible, and that the square flat side is against the cab itself and the frame. So you can see that I will need to bring that tail of wire up in between the cab and the frame, and the coiling is going to be going away from what will become the bail later. So it's going away from the bail. So let's wrap that one time. Pull that nice and firmly into position, and this is why a strong wire for your frame is important, because you're using tension to set. So controlling with my non-dominant hand there, drawing the wire around, and again this is the kind of point at which half round likes to twist. Luckily we're still looking at the rounded side, tightening up that coil and just pulling that down really firmly. If you do get a teeny tiny gap, you can very, very gently tighten that up. Let's flip this back to the front. We can just adjust that slightly later. And you can see where we are getting to. So to complete the design, we're going to run a stripe down across both of those shoulders of the design to the centre point. If you prefer, you can cross them over so that they go outside those first two swooshes. We're just going to open those out gently, because what we're looking to do is bring that swoop of wire over the surface of the cab. We're not detracting too much from the cab. And then we're going to do exactly the same thing as we did in the first section, just making a tiny bit of a gap here, supporting that arc. We're going to tuck that tail up in between the frame and the cab, making sure that we're not interrupting any of the other wires that have gone before us. So that's one wrap. Push that all the way through. There's a second wrap. All you will need to do to finish off is repeat with your fourth wire that sits on the face. Again, looking to snuggle down into that gap at the lowest centre, that 6 o'clock position. Wrapping in the same direction towards the centre. So we hit the wire frame and then we wrap twice around. Flip it onto the back, and then we can go up to whatever point pleases us. Now I quite like to cross over like so, because it encourages the rear side of the cabochon to be kept safely, but as long as you're taking those two wires to similar points on the back, and in fact I'll show you that last little bit on this side now. Is that how I did it on this one? That's exactly how I did it on this one. So we're looking to secure the rear of the cab. So again, tucking that tail up in between the cab and the frame. I'm going to use my pliers because it's getting a little bit tense, and we'll put that last section up and through, in between, pull that nice and firmly into position. So I'll probably take that for one more wrap, just so that I'm putting a really good strong finishing point, making sure as ever that the flat side is against the frame and the rounded side is sitting outwards. Whoops, there goes the camera. So to finish that off, I'm going to trim that last little tail of wire as close as I can so that it sits away and down inside the frame. Just give that a tiny, tiny pinch to finish it off. It's like adding a full stop to a sentence, making sure it's all good and secure. And I'm just going to push that over slightly. If we look at the front of the design, we've just got to repeat on the left-hand side the exact same process. So I've just finished off by repeating exactly the same technique on either side, and I wanted to show you on the board now how I've actually been able to hide that little rookie mistake I made at the beginning where I wound the wire the wrong way around that frame. So if you'd like to join me back at the board, I'll show you how to fix a little bit of a mistake like that. So what I did at the beginning of the cab setting part is I wound my wire around the frame, going up on one side and down on the other side, and that to me isn't saleable because you don't have that beautiful sense of symmetry. So what I've done to fix the issue is I've added an extra bar of wire across the back, again with the flat side against the cab and the rounded side visible, and I've got wire winding upwards on one side and downwards on the other side, and then when you look on the front there's wire both above and below that first contact point at the 3 o'clock and 9 o'clock positions. If you do need to refine slightly the path that that half wire takes across the surface of the cab, I find a thumbnail is a really good thing to use, because you can just gently coerce the wire backwards or forwards or up and down a little bit, and you do still have the ability to move these wires ever so slightly on the framework. Now, whilst this is a design that relies on your customer or your friend or yourself taking care of the design, it does still very much pass that shake test. The world's simplest bail would be to grab your bail makers, a flat pair of pliers rather, and we're just going to make sure that those two shoulders are coming away from the design at the same height. Just pop a little forwards bend a tiny bit away from the top of the frame, and then we're just going to wrap probably around the number 6, the largest size, draw those wires along across the back, and then all we will do is just take these two teeny tiny little sections of available wire, and this was with quite a short piece. I think I was working with about 8 or 9 inches in the end, which is why I suggest working with 12 inches of wire for a cab like this. It gives you many more options, and all we're going to do is just coerce a nice shape out of that bail, which is slightly on the wonk, but I'll deal with that in a second, and then just draw those two side wires around. Now, it is a little bit more challenging with that slightly heavier wire, so do just take your time. I'm going to push one across in one direction. Let's grip that wire and push it over the neck section. The simplest bail that you can make is just to tie those wires together. When I first learnt wire working, I was told to do twisting at this point, and I found that that just weakened the whole project and things would fall apart. So all I'm doing is taking that wire around the neck, squishing it down flat on the back. I've got the shakes today. It's been a naughty diabetes kind of day. And then you can do the exact same thing on the other side. So draw the other wire across. Give that a tiny bit of a squish, and then bring the tail. You can either bring it across the back, or what I like to do is just tuck that teeny tiny tail inside the bail and press that down. Get my fingers out the way, press that down so that it's hidden away and can't catch. And what you have is a very, very quick bail. Doesn't take very long to make at all, and you can just straighten that up either with a wooden dowel. Let's see if it will go on the number 6 still. If not, I'll take that down to the number 5 and just straighten that bail up. Very, very simple, very, very quick. If you want, you can do something a lot more elaborate. It takes just a little bit more wire. Just going to draw those two passes of wire together. It's a perfectly usable bail. Very, very quickly made indeed. So that is my very simple way to use half round wire to set your cabochon. I hope that you've enjoyed the video. I know I've enjoyed using Mark's lovely resin cabs. I'll see you again really soon. Bye for now.